A disturbing discovery uncovered in one of the driest places on Earth reveals a violent past.
They uncovered the remains of a staggering 96 humans.
The skin of her face and neck was stretched and pulled up over her mouth, creating a mask of flesh.
The discovery of an enormous geoglyph leads to an international mystery.
The total diameter of the figure is an astonishing 28 kilometers.
This thing is huge.
But who was behind it?
Mysterious bones are exposed in a Chilean road cut.
The more they dug, the more the sands revealed bone after bone.
They're pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved.
Astonishing discoveries unearthed from the depths of the desert. Ancient lost cities. Forgotten treasures. Mysterious structures. Extraordinary curiosities, once lost to the sands of time, are finally exposed. As new technology uncovers remarkable tales hidden beneath the deserts of the world, the secrets in the sand will finally be revealed. The northern region of the state of South Australia is one of the most arid, barren places on the continent. This vast desert plain is dotted with dry salt lake beds and little else.
Except for some cattle stations, small remote communities, and indigenous groups, the area is largely uninhabited due to the harsh conditions.
An Outback pilot is flying a small plane between the towns of Kuri Ptiri and Marree. On a plateau about 60 kilometers west of Marree, he spots something strange on the desert floor.
He couldn't believe his eyes. Deep, thick lines, several kilometers long, appear to have been carved into the earth. And when he gets a better look, it seems to be the huge figure of a man.
He has a prominent beard, wears a headband, and has his hair tied back. And his left hand is holding something above his head.
The lines that make up the image are about 70 to 90 meters wide. From top to bottom, it measures 4.2 kilometers, and the total diameter of the figure is an astonishing 28 kilometers.
It's visible from over 5,000 feet in the air. This thing is huge.
Maneuvering for a clearer view, the pilot notices something else about the figure. What looked like ritualistic scarring on his chest.
Some Aboriginal groups of Australia practice scarification, which is cutting one's body intentionally to produce scars. Beyond aesthetic purposes, they used scarification to mark certain milestones in life: marriage, the birth of a child, the death of a loved one.
Given the hairstyle, the headband, and the chest scarring, the figure might be an Aboriginal man in a hunting stance. Could it be an ancient indigenous geoglyph of some kind?
This is Arabana country. They have native title to over 69,000 square kilometers in the region.
The traditional tribal name of the Arabana is Arabana, which means the land of the mound springs, water holes that are vital to sustaining life in the dry desert outback.
The Arabana have lived in this area for thousands of years, so it's possible that the geoglyph had always been there, but no one had noticed it before.
The scale of the figure makes it one of the largest geoglyphs in the world, drawing comparisons to Peru's famous Nazca lines.
The Nazca lines are huge line drawings etched in the ground, spanning some 50 square kilometers of the Rio Grande de Nazca River Basin, which is one of the driest places on Earth.
They're thought to be ritual offerings to the gods, asking for rain in a desert environment.
Some of the lines are believed to be around 2,000 years old. So could the geoglyph in Australia be as old as the Nazca lines?
As the Australians continue to explore the site on the ground, they find modern bamboo nursery stakes about every 10 meters, marking the outline of the figure.
It can't be ancient. These stakes look like something you'd buy at your local garden center, and their placement is so accurate, it had to be done using GPS coordinates.
People start looking for answers, and it eventually leads them to satellite images of the plateau. There's a picture taken on May 27th, 1998, that shows no sign of the figure. The next available image is from June 28th, and it's clearly visible. So we know it must have been built within that time frame.
And so begins one of Australia's most perplexing mysteries. Who created this mysterious geoglyph in the Outback?
For something that big to be built so quickly, heavy machinery must have been used, but nobody in the area saw or heard anything. It's pretty remote, but that's still surprising.
Then a series of cryptic, anonymous faxes began arriving at local businesses, alerting them to the figure's presence.
There is a giant drawing of an Aborigine more than 2 miles long. The figure could provide your state of Southern Australia with the type of tourist attraction it is apparently seeking. Aborigines from local reservations could also benefit as guides, artists, etc.
Whoever sent this message must have had intimate knowledge of the figure, as nobody else knew about it except for the pilot and the few residents of the area that he told.
Analysis of the language patterns reveals that much of the phrasing and spelling seems to be American.
They use the term reservations instead of Aboriginal country, which is the Australian terminology. They also use miles instead of kilometers.
The phrase state of Southern Australia is used, which is wrong. The state is actually called South Australia.
Spurred on by the developing mystery, authorities and curious citizens alike make the journey to get a closer look at the geoglyph, now being called Marree Man after the town nearby. What they find is extraordinary.
It's perfectly proportioned and so well drawn that whoever created it likely drew the figure by hand, then used a computer to overlay the image on a satellite photo of the plateau. They would have had to adjust the scale to the contours of the land, then map out the outline using a handheld GPS device.
GPS technology was very new at the time, and only a few industries would have had access to it. Mining surveyors, academia, the military.
Authorities discover something puzzling during their examination of the site. A small pit dug near the figure that contains a satellite image of the Marree Man, as well as a small American flag.
Between the flag, the American terminology and the faxes, necessary GPS expertise, it all seems to indicate that Americans were responsible for the Marree Man.
Could the US military have been behind it? They would have had the technology, access to equipment, and they're experts at stealth operations.
An enormous geoglyph appears in the middle of the Australian outback, leaving local residents wondering who could have been responsible for its creation. The United States Air Force did have a presence in the area at that time, sharing the Joint Defense Facility Nurrungar with the Australian Defence Force from 1969 to 1999.
Some have theorized that Marree Man was a parting gift to the ADF. But if that's the case, what's up with all the cryptic messages? Wouldn't they have just taken credit?
The US military officially denied any involvement in the creation of the Marree Man. So if it wasn't them, who was it?
Several months later, another clue directed followers and authorities 16,000 kilometers away to a mystery buried near the Cern giant in Dorset, England. The Cern giant is a 55-meter-tall geoglyph of a naked man holding a large club carved with chalk into a hillside near the village of Cern, Abbas.
We now have an international scavenger hunt on our hands. The note discovered had clues that point towards tourism and support of indigenous athletes of the Sydney Olympics.
Could this possibly mean that an indigenous group was behind it?
The land where the Marree man is situated was part of a contentious title claim dispute, leaving some to speculate that the geoglyph was an attempt to assert ownership of the land by the Arabana.
Though the Marree man appears to be an Aboriginal hunter, the hairstyle, headband, and chest scarring don't match those of an Arabana man. And if it was a statement of land ownership, wouldn't they want to take credit for it?
Authorities then turned their attention to another clue buried near the Long Man of Wilmington in England.
Similar to the Cern giant, the Long Man is a hillside geoglyph, but instead of wielding a club, it's holding long, narrow sticks in each hand.
They are directed to a 1935 book entitled The Red Center by H.H. Finlayson. It contains a photo of an indigenous hunter, similar to the Marree man geoglyph.
The author of the book was associated with the Museum of South Australia, but died in 1991, so he could not be responsible for the Marree man. With no other clues, rumors began to circulate about a suspect who was alive and well at the time.
Bardius Goldberg, an eccentric artist who liked to thumb his nose at authority, had a history of creating large-scale artworks on the ground.
He's alleged to have received $10,000 shortly before the Marree man was discovered. And he told friends that he was working on a big project, but he couldn't reveal any details.
However, Goldberg passed away in 2002 without ever confirming or denying that he was involved in the making of the Marree man.
It's been almost 25 years since the Marree man was discovered, and in all that time, not one person has come forward to say that they helped Goldberg or claim the geoglyph's creation for themselves.
In 2012, the Australian government awarded the Arabana people native title of the land containing the Marree man. But this time, the extreme conditions of the Outback had eroded the outline to the point where it was barely visible.
Looking for ways to increase tourism in the area, the Arabana joined forces with a local business owner who was asked to organize the restoration project. But even with advances in technology, it's a daunting task.
And then, out of the blue, one final twist in the saga of the Marree man. An anonymous email is received with a set of highly accurate coordinates outlining the entire figure.
In 2016, armed with this precise data, the team was able to fully restore the Marree man to its original glory. To this day, tourism in the area continues to flourish, with visitors from far and wide flocking to see the mysterious wonder in the desert.
In the end, we may never know who created it. Some say it was a bored farmer. Others think it was a publicity stunt to drum up tourism. And the more conspiracy-minded even suggest extraterrestrial involvement.
Perhaps the enigma of the Marree man can be summed up by a quote from one of the original anonymous faxes. Half the art is mystery, and so, enduring, let it be. Along the northern coast of Chile lies the Atacama, one of the oldest and driest deserts on the planet.
This desert is believed to be 150 million years old, and covers a nearly 1,100-kilometer stretch of land between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean.
Arica is Chile's northernmost city and is known as the city where it never rains. This hyper-arid desert landscape receives less than 1 millimeter of rain each year and is largely devoid of plant and animal life. On the outskirts of town, the Arica Water Company is digging ground to lay a new pipeline when they make a disturbing discovery, long lost to the sands of the Atacama.
Less than a meter below the surface, in an area less than 7 square meters, they uncovered the remains of a staggering 96 humans.
On the edge of Chile's Atacama Desert, workers make a shocking discovery. Just below the surface, the remains of nearly 100 people are uncovered.
The deformed but well-preserved human remains were stuffed with sticks and reeds. They were decorated with both red and black clay masks and elaborate wigs.
This isn't your average burial. These are intentionally mummified remains. So who are they?
Using radiocarbon dating, archaeologists are able to prove that these extraordinary mummies are more than 7,000 years old.
This area of Chile was once home to the Chinchorro, an ancient culture of coastal hunter-gatherers and fishermen. They were a coastal-dwelling people who didn't cast any pottery or build any monuments. They lived from around 7,000 BCE to 1500 BCE, more than 9,000 years ago.
That means that these 7,000-year-old South American Chinchorro mummies are more than 2,000 years older than the mummies of Egypt. This is an amazing discovery.
While some of the bodies have been inadvertently preserved by the dry conditions of the desert climate, resulting in naturally baked mummies, most of the remains have been intentionally and meticulously mummified.
Egyptian mummification practices involved laying the human remains flat and desiccating them before wrapping and entombing them. However, in the case of these Chinchorro mummies, the human remains were bundled together with other materials and more or less left to the elements in shallow grave sites. And the hyper-dry conditions of the Atacama made the preservation process even more effective.
The purposefully preserved remains of the Chinchorro fall into two main mortuary styles: mummies wearing the black clay masks that date from 5,000 to 3,000 BCE, and ones wearing red clay masks that date from 2,500 to 2,000 BCE.
The black clay mummies have been dismembered, treated, and reassembled, then stuffed with reeds, sticks, and ash. Then they were dressed with clay and painted with manganese, a pigment derived from local rock formations.
The red clay mummies were treated with a more surgical approach. Their organs were removed to dry the cavities before the stuffing process. They were then masked and painted with red ochre, a naturally red-toned clay.
Whether men, women, or children, these remains were preserved with care and treated with reverence, regardless of status. This is another difference from the well-known Egyptian mummification practice, which was primarily accessible to members of the elite.
Additional excavations further inland reveal 6 more recent burial sites containing hundreds of remains. These naturally mummified remains date to between 1000 BCE and 600 CE, long after the Chinchorro culture came to an end.
Physical investigation and X-ray imaging of these more recently discovered bones uncovered shocking details about how they may have lived and died.
They found broken ribs, cheeks and collarbones, severe head injuries, and obvious puncture wounds to the soft tissue, including the groin, lungs, and spine. These are clear signs of traumatic injury due to violence.
Among the remains, a young woman drew special attention because of the brutality of her injuries.
The skin of her face and neck was stretched and pulled up over her mouth, creating a mask of flesh.
In the arid Atacama desert of Chile, a gruesome discovery of the remains of a young woman reveals a brutal and violent past.
The skin of her face and neck was stretched and pulled up over her mouth, creating a mask of flesh. It's horrifying.
These grotesque injuries also appear to be perimortem. She was clearly tortured and mutilated before her death.
Archaeologists also found spears, knives, and stones tied with ropes alongside the bodies. The malicious injuries coupled with the weapons makes one wonder what was the cause of the violence.
The earlier Chinchorro people were not strangers to violence either, but none were treated in such an abusive manner as these later peoples. There were a number of fatal wounds found with the earlier Chinchorro mummies, like this adult male from around 1780 BCE. He was found with the head of a harpoon embedded in his chest, but the pattern of violence within this community appears to have been more sporadic than that found in later communities.
The adult Chinchorro population did show a smaller range of healed and fatal wounds. However, the level and inconsistency of these traumas appears to be representative of small skirmishes, nothing like the consistent levels of violence we see in these later communities.
To gain a better understanding of the violence these later communities were experiencing, and to determine their origins and migration patterns, samples were taken from 69 of the naturally preserved mummies discovered at the 6 burial sites.
The result of the sample analysis proves that the mutilated woman was from further north, in today's Peru.
42 people in the sample are believed to have been coastal dwellers, living off the sea and foraging in the desert. This group of 42 would have had a lifestyle more similar to that of the earlier Chinchorro peoples.
The remaining 27 shared an isotopic signature that indicates that they lived on a more varied terrestrial diet. This means they were likely living deeper into the Azapa Valley and were less reliant on the sea.
This evidence suggests that the conflicts were between the farmers of the valley and the fishermen along the coast.
At the time, the river valleys were some of the only places in the Atacama with enough water to grow a greater range of foods.
It seems that after many thousands of years, groups of these coastal peoples began moving inland away from the sea in an attempt to forge a new life, building small villages along these scarce outcroppings of viable land.
They planted corn and chili peppers, likely trading with and learning from the non-desert farming communities of the north and east.
Though these communities remained small, many people settling in one area would naturally lead to increased interpersonal conflict. However, experts believe there were larger forces at play here.
Archaeologists turned to the environment, examining marine life, weather patterns, and conducting mineral tests for a more thorough understanding of the situation.
Fishermen are dependent on the sea, and these ancient communities were no different. Climate scientists studying historic patterns of El Niño believe that this recurrent natural event may have played a role in the violence that they experienced.
El Niño events interrupt the cool upswells of nutrient-rich water coming from the depths of the ocean and replaces them with warmer water. This results in less phytoplankton, ultimately reducing the available sea life that these ancient fishermen would have relied on.
Climate scientists also studied the discarded shells and marine life remains found in dump sites near these coastal communities. These remains are believed to be food waste, and so they're evidence of the local diet at the time.
In the same period of time that these people were experiencing extreme violence, they also found evidence of a significant seafood shortage. Less seafood for an extended period of time could have made these people even more desperate.
El Niño does not only influence the sea, it also has a drying effect on the already parched Atacama landscape. This warmer, drier climate would have also added pressure on these ancient farmers.
Archaeologists believe that the lack of seafood stocks led desperate coastal peoples into the nearby inland farming settlements in search of food.
Under the hottest, driest desert conditions exacerbated by El Niño, communities likely fought over access to the most basic resources, like food, land, and water.
As the environment changed, so too did the lifestyles of the Atacama peoples, who relied upon the sustainability of their resources and their ability to defend them. Abu Sir is situated on Egypt's western desert plateau, only 25 kilometers south of Cairo. Despite being so close to such a large urban city, it feels like it is in the middle of the desert.
The desert at Abu Sir is a famed burial ground of ancient Egypt. Over the course of centuries, many of the kingdom's pharaohs and nobility were buried here.
It is here, as well as in nearby areas like Giza, where excavations have revealed incredible artifacts and structures that have contributed significantly to our understanding of ancient Egyptian society.
A team of archaeologists are excavating a site when they come upon a vast collection of ceramic vessels. While it isn't unusual to find ancient ceramics at archaeological sites, the sheer volume of them is astounding.
Inside the vessels, they find materials that priests would have on hand when embalming or mummifying a body. So could this actually be a tomb?
At the famous Egyptian burial grounds of Abu Sir, archaeologists find a large cache of ceramic vessels containing embalming materials, leading them to wonder if they have uncovered a previously undiscovered tomb.
In ancient Egypt, the dead would sometimes be buried with some of the instruments and materials that were used in the embalming process. And it appears that this is what has happened here.
Archaeologists believe this is what's called a shaft tomb, essentially a deep rectangular grave. The ancient Egyptians sometimes buried their dead in tombs such as these, along with a diverse range of tools, clothes, and other necessities they would require in the afterlife.
But there are literally hundreds of these embalming vessels, which makes one wonder, who are they all for?
As they continue to excavate the chamber, they find a set of 4 limestone canopic jars. Canopic jars are essential vessels in the rite of mummification.
Mummification was an elaborate process which involved removing the organs from the body, treating them, and placing the liver, intestines, stomach, and lungs in canopic jars. They were then usually placed next to the deceased, where they would remain for all eternity.
The Egyptians believed that the body was the home for the soul or spirit. If the body was destroyed, or in other words, decomposed, the spirit would be lost. For this reason, great care was taken in preserving the physical manifestation of the body. This way, both spirit and body could continue on together into the afterlife.
But these 4 canopic jars are all empty. And not only are these jars empty, but there is no sarcophagus either. So if this is actually a tomb, where is the body?
In 1000 BCE, during the time that we call the Third Intermediate Period, Embalming techniques improved, and for the wealthiest elites, these advances enabled priests to treat the viscera and then place them back inside the body. This means the canopic jars would be included in the grave for symbolic purposes only. So that kind of narrows down the time period we should be looking at, to sometime in the Third Intermediate Period or after.
After cleaning and inspecting the empty canopic jars, the archaeologists notice inscriptions written across their surface, indicating the tomb belongs to a man named Wahibri Marree Neith, son of Lady Urturu.
Throughout ancient Egyptian history, there were several men who went by that name. But a tomb like this would come at a significant financial cost. So this Wahibri Marree Neith would likely have been a wealthy nobleman or high official of sorts.
Similar shaft tombs have been found in the direct vicinity of this one. In fact, next to Wahibri Marree Neith lies the tomb of one Uja Haresnet. Inscriptions on his statue indicate that he lived around the 6th century BCE.
This was a period of great volatility and flux for the kingdom. In 525 BCE, the Persian army under King Cambyses II had invaded and defeated the Egyptians. Cambyses crowned himself Pharaoh of Egypt and subjected its people to his rule.
Uja Haresnet's life's work is inscribed on his statue, which reads that he convinced the occupying powers to respect local tradition and pay homage to Egyptian deities.
As they continue to excavate the tomb of Wahibri Marree Neith, the archaeologists uncover a secondary shaft that descends 16 meters into the bedrock. At the bottom, they discover a large double sarcophagus composed of 2 sections, an outer limestone covering which encases an inner sarcophagus that is made of basalt. Both appear to be heavily damaged.
There is clear evidence of looting. The grave robbers made an opening in the outer section of the sarcophagus and then smashed open the inner section in order to get inside and remove the mummy.
But despite the damage to the sarcophagus and the looting that took place, they did not succeed in making off with everything. They found that Wahibri Marree Neith had been buried with 402 Ushabti figures.
Ushabtis are small human figurines that were an essential component of a person's burial. In the afterlife, when the gods called upon the deceased to work, he or she could turn to the Ushabtis, who acted as servants performing manual labor for the departed.
The archaeologists also find inscriptions on his sarcophagus, which partially translates to commander of foreign mercenaries.
So, Wahibri Marree Neith was a commander of mercenaries who were fighting for the newly minted Persian ruler of Egypt.
What we can tell from this grave is that Egyptians, despite intense pressures from the ruling Persians, maintained their rights and traditions, which might have been very difficult in the face of Persian occupation.
You can see evidence of this struggle in the statue of Uja Haresnet. He's depicted wearing Persian clothing, but described in the text carved on the statue as an Egyptian official who lived in accordance with the traditional rules of Ma'at, or order.
Wahibri Marree Neith may have been fighting for a foreign power by commanding foreign soldiers, but he and his Egyptian peers maintained their local traditions at a time of incredible uncertainty. The Pan-American Highway, a network of roads connecting North and South America, runs through Chile's Atacama Desert. While the Atacama is not the hottest desert, it is one of the driest places on Earth.
Some experts believe that this land, which stretches over 1,000 kilometers, is one of the oldest deserts in the world.
During a routine expansion of the Pan American Highway, road crews digging new ground discovered something bizarre in the middle of the desert.
They uncovered massive bones just below the surface, and not just some, but hundreds of them in a 240-meter-long road cut.
The highway cuts through a harsh landscape, bordered by the Pacific to the west and the desert to the east. The bones were found not far from shore, between Caldera and the inland town of Copiapó.
Perfectly preserved by the arid climate of the ancient Atacama, these bones are pieces of a puzzle, waiting to be solved. What ancient creature could they be?
After a highway expansion uncovers massive, perfectly preserved bones in Chile's Atacama Desert, the roadwork is halted to protect the bones, and experts are called in to properly assess the site.
The more they dug, the more the sands revealed bone after bone. In fact, many whole skeletons were found side by side.
It took only a brief inspection by paleontologists for the answer to become clear. These are whale bones.
The whale bones were discovered along with various other marine specimens lying between 2.5 and 7 meters below ground, while the majority of the whale bones were found at a depth ranging from 5 to 7 meters.
In total, paleontologists counted an astounding 31 whale skeletons. And not just any whales, these are rorqual whales, a type of baleen or toothless whale that filter food from the sea using large, thin keratin plates. The remains represented a wide range of maturation, from calves to full-grown adults.
Rorquals can be identified by the ventral grooves that extend from their chin all the way down to their bellies, which allows them to open their mouths extra wide.
Along with the remains of the whales, they uncovered a variety of other extinct marine mammals and vertebrates, including seals, an aquatic sloth, a walrus whale, sharks, and large fish.
Based on the extinct aquatic sloths and extinct sharks found in the sediments, they were able to determine that the site dates from the late Miocene era, so it's between 5 and 11 million years old.
How did so many whales end up on the edge of the world's driest desert? One theory is that a tsunami could be responsible.
A tsunami can be caused by several factors. Large earthquakes that occur near or under the ocean, onshore landslides, and even by volcanic eruptions. Chile has the 5th highest occurrence of tsunamis in the world, with a total of 166 tsunamis to date.
One of the biggest tsunamis on record in Chile was a 50-meter high wave. That type of oceanic event would have the force necessary to disrupt and displace many different types of marine life.
Depending on their depth at the time of that type of extreme wave, a whale near the beach could either be pulled out to sea or stranded on the sand.
But we would likely see a lot more disordered and scattered bones as a result of trauma, rather than the intact skeletons found here along the highway.
Not to mention the disruption to the land caused by a wave of that size would alter the sedimentary structure of the sands around the bones. But those changes are not present here. If they weren't ravaged by a tsunami, the question is, did they swim here?
Paleontologists examining the layout of the site determined that the placement of many of the intact whales is orthogonal, or lying at a right angle to the flow of the current.
The orientation of the remains indicates that they didn't swim, but were swept there by the currents.
Additionally, experts determined that the majority of whales found in the deposits were positioned ventral side up, or in other words, on their backs.
When you take into account their bodily orientation and belly-up discovery, it's highly likely that these whales washed up dead or dying, only to be trapped and buried by the sand. So how did so many marine animals get trapped here?
The location where these whales were found is what is known as a supertidal flat, an area of land extending just beyond the reach of high tide.
These flats were cut off from the beach by rock formations, preventing marine life from entering or exiting unless there was extremely high tides or rough storm waters. This accounts for the lack of apparent scavenging by marine life, other than some hungry but now fossilized crabs.
The Atacama Desert is also incapable of supporting large land animals that would be interested in scavenging on this salty feast. The restricted flat, coupled with the hyper-arid desert climate, created an excellent environment for in situ decay.
The whales likely experienced a quick death in the ocean before being carried to the flat. So what killed these whales?
Stranding, or beaching, occurs when large sea mammals or fish end up on the shore unable to return to the water on their own. While there can be extenuating circumstances, this is usually due to sickness or injury, inclement weather, or navigation errors.
While the beaching of lone animals is somewhat common, mass strandings are much more rare.
Statistically, toothed whales have a greater likelihood of mass stranding due to the fact that they're highly social and live in larger groups compared to baleen whales.
In the late 1980s, 14 humpback whales, another variety of baleen whale, were discovered beached along 50 kilometers of coastline around Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
The humpbacks showed no signs of bodily trauma, but their stomach contents showed high concentrations of toxins that likely caused their death. Could something similar have happened to these Chilean whales?
Unlike the beached humpback whales, the team cannot test the stomach content of the rorqual whales, but their skeletal remains may hold the answer. Experts identify orange-stained blotches that they believe to be the remains of algal mats.
Algal mats are multi-layered sheets of microorganisms that form on the surface of water or rocks. When these mats reproduce at excessive rates, they can result in harmful algal blooms, also known as red or green tides.
Best estimates are that this massive ancient whale deposit is the result of rapid death at sea due to ingested toxins created by harmful algal blooms.
Runoff from the iron-rich Andes Mountains, combined with swells of nutrient-rich ocean water, would have created the perfect storm for algal blooms.
The whale remains have all been recovered and transported to museums for safekeeping. Named Cerro Ballena, or Whale Hill, for the sheer volume of rorqual whales discovered there. This site will continue to enhance researchers' understanding of ocean life for years to come.